Hey, what is up guys, it's Lewpac, back with another Albion Online video for you, and in today's upload we're bringing you the 5v5 meta snapshot for the month of December. Yes, I know we skipped a month with November. Honestly though, I was crazy busy and the meta really didn't switch that much until we got the latest balance patch. So if you don't know about the meta snapshot, just briefly, each month we go over the 5v5 weapons for the various classes, the picks for the armor, and just talk briefly about the meta in 5v5. This primarily covers Crystal League, but it definitely has some knock-on stuff in Hellgates as well. So starting as always with the tanks of Albion Online. Tanking has seen a bit of a shift up in the meta, and this has had a knock on elsewhere too. We see the pole hammer actually going right to the top of S tier immediately. It's just people have been harnessing the power of this weapon, the insane stun, the range on it, using the geyser for interrupts. The people have been playing this weapon really well, and it's become such a powerful tool that it's causing people to fully switch up their comps and their builds to counter these pole hammers. So when it comes to range DPS, obviously you're going to see a lot of Merc hoods now, because they need to get out of the stun immediately, or they need to have it available to get the stun off of their healer immediately. Coupling it with other control items like a demon helm or whatever, this has been really powerful, and pole hammer is absolutely kicking butt right now in 5v5. It's not the only option though, which is nice. There's still plenty of tanks running the Black Monk staff, there's still the Quarter staff. Heavy mace is still pretty playable, especially now that people are playing pole hammer. Mace particularly suffers against Quarter staffs because cartwheel can interrupt the W. Pole hammer actually makes mace better in the matchup, but I don't recommend mace unless you're against a nature or a bow, or preferably both. The Ironclad and Great Hammer both still playable as well in B tier. Not so much of a fan of the Great Hammer personally, because as you're going to see later on, people are playing Fire Staffs with Firewall, and Firewall again is a very good counter to the Great Hammer tackle ability. It also works against Heavy Mace too. This is pretty good shape, honestly. There is still plenty of tanks playing those Quarterstaffs. Polehammer has been impressive, but it isn't overrepresented, so I do like where tanks are at right now. For the hot picks on the tanks, there's not much variety though, and it's pretty much exactly where we were before. It's a Demon Helmet if you're going the Silence route, or a Fiend's Cowl with either the Purge or the Bop, depending on if you've got stuff needs purging or you just want a more CC orientated setup. The armor is primarily Judy armor, though I have seen some naughty tanks running the Armor of Valor in combination with a Bruiser with Armor of Valor for like just crazy amounts of silence and like nibble damage from it. But Judy really is the go-to. It's still such an incredible ability for zonal control, holding your ground or pushing aggressive. It's a great ability all round. As for the shoes, Fiend Sandals. It's been Fiend Sandals for the last however many metas. You know, there is things you could swap in, but Fiend Sandals just have a good skill ceiling, multiple utilities, and are the go-to. So tanks are quite interesting, and next up is one of the biggest changes then as we go over to the healers. Now, healing, as we know, for the last few months has been a one-trick pony. For a while we had that Spammer Jammer Holy, and then all of a sudden the one-hand nature overtook once the Spammer Jammer got removed because of the Flash Heal being taken out. Now all of a sudden we actually have a decent healing meta. I mean, I say decent, there's only two playable options in fives pretty much. However, at least one of them is Holy and one of them is Nature. The Hallerfall and the one-hand nature from the Holy and Nature lines are the playable options. Now this is good because there is one from each tree. I would like to see more things, but this is where we're at. The Hallerfall is a great stationary healing weapon. It puts out decent output. You've got a lot of utility with the leap in. It also has a knock up on the E ability. It counts as a mobility and an iframe. It's a very powerful weapon in the right hands. And honestly, I thought it was going to be the only weapon. After Nature got nerfed again, just as the meta started to level out, they nerfed Breeze again on nature, which I think was sucky. I think we would hit like a 50-50 meta, and they just went a little bit too far on nature. Like I talked last time about them going a little bit too far on Death Givers. I feel they did the same here. Nature is still better on the move though. It's got those hots so your guys can dive deep. It's still vulnerable to purge and reset cancelling, but it's still very playable. The Hallerfall is great when you've got pressure and your healer can sit and spam everybody, but the Hallerfall is definitely worse when you're on the back foot than the nature is. It's a lot harder to kite with, it's a lot harder to full reset when the momentum's going against you. It's almost like a if you're winning, you just win harder weapon. But if you can create space, if your team is good enough to create space for the healer, the Hallerfall is incredible. Right now, I don't have a personal preference. I think I prefer playing with nature healers, but that's just because people aren't as used to the Hallerfall yet, and it's more of a personal adjustment having to get used to it. In terms of the helmets then, Graveguard helm is still the go-to for the natures. I have also seen some Hallerfall players running it. The only thing is Hallerfall is actually a bit more energy consuming. Graveguard is still very, very nice as long as you can get your energy management elsewhere. For example, Limhurst Cape, energy pot, stuff like that. It all depends on your style of play and where you want to fit your energy management into the build. You could, in theory, go for a Scholar's Cowl or a Royal Cowl for infinite energy or conditional energy with a defensive, but the Graveguard save is just so good, especially with the Hallerfall E. Like being able to leap in, Graveguard someone else, like then drop an orb and you've got resistances up because of it. It's such a good like clutch healing weapon in certain situations. For the chest pieces, Robe of Purity is pretty much still the go-to. That said, with the Armor of Valor on bruisers now, Robe of Purity can actually work against you. Because of course, you pop your Purity, the Valor just runs across, it damages him, he can't be moved because it's a superior channel, and then it silences you. Like in those situations, your Robe of Purity actually hurts you, and what's worse is you can't cancel it. So it just keeps on happening. And you end up, if the Valor guys are just sitting on you, you can't ever use your robe, which of course leaves you vulnerable to resets cancelling, especially if you're playing the nature. Another option is the Druid robe on the nature, but you're vulnerable to purge and you are without that defensive from the Purity. So I think that's very, very conditional against like 2 Valors or something. You maybe switch to a Druid robe. You could even think about a Cleric or a Mage if you really need those defenses. But your team should be peeling for you. You shouldn't be under more pressure, generally, than the Bruiser and Tank. Like the range DPS should not be able to connect with your healer if the rest of your DPS are doing their jobs. For boots, still personal preference here. Assassin shoes for a short iframe and movement boost, Royal for a longer iframe, or Mage sandals for the blink out. I do like an iframe just because it makes you a lot less vulnerable to demon helms and being shut down that way. It's also, you know, if you can read a stun from a pole hammer, you can potentially roll it if you've got good sort of game sense about that. But if you do get stunned, of course, your team should be coming through with the Merc helms immediately. So overall, not like many weapons for healing, but at least we are seeing Holy and Nature played together. On to the melees then. The melee DPS has also had a bit of a switch up and is one of the focal points of this meta. The Carrion Caller rocketed to the top with its anti-heal. Now, the combination of the Carrion Caller with the Armor of Valor is what's causing problems, right? The Armor of Valor makes them mega tanky. It lets them reflect all these dots into like nibble damage and silences, run through Robes of Purity and firewalls while damaging the person who's cast them. And Carrion Callers are still putting out the top DPS on the team in defensive plate armor. It's ridiculous. It is getting nerfed. Axes have already seen a bit of a hit with the nerf bat, and also the Carrion Caller is getting a reduction in its healing reduction because the other core component, and one of the reasons why One Hand Nature is kind of falling behind a bit, is because the Carrion Caller Morgana's Raven, just reducing those heals means you cannot Graveguard someone under a Morgana's Raven. Like, it does next to nothing. You don't really want to use your reset, but sometimes you have to, and it's just helped by winning the value war so hard. Everything else then that was being played lately, you know, Bridled Fury, Death Givers, still do fantastic damage. They're just not as good as a carrion caller. Halberd is like a budget carrion caller, but you don't get the anti-heal, so it's not as good. Forge Hammer's got a bit of a buff to their attack speed, meaning the mini stun Forge Hammer build is insanely good for CCing and interrupting something like a crossbow over and over again, but it's just not as effective as a carrion caller. You can't fit the Valor onto the Forge Hammers. It doesn't really work with daggers. Do you know what I mean? It's just this synergy, this constant bleed damage and anti-heal is so much pressure right now. Carving Sword again, still possibly playable, just not as good as a carrion caller. So while there are more options listed here for potentially playable than say the healers, unfortunately they're just not as good as a carrion caller right now. Maybe this next nerf, this next healing reduction will make it a bit different. Hopefully by next meta that's what we'll see. As for the hot picks then, for your carrion callers, because it will mostly be carrion callers, Scholar's Cowl seems to be a good choice for maintaining energy. We do know axes are very, very energy hungry. If you're feeling more aggressive, you can go something like a Hood of Tenacity for more anti-heal with your anti-heal, or even a Stalker Hood to help your ranged DPS push through the kills. If you use either of those though, of course, you'll need to manage your energy with a Limhurst Cape, which in my opinion is a lot less reliable than a Scholar's Cowl. Much longer cooldown and is purgeable, but it could work, especially if you win quick enough. Armor choices. Armor of Valor is just crazy right now. I mean, I think it's getting a nerf in the next balance patch. I'll be making a video on the NDA patch soon, probably early next week. I've still got a lot to pump out this week. I don't think I'll get time for it. But that or the Soldier Armor. The Soldier Armor build is still played and is still valid. But the Armor of Valor, the chaos this causes mid-fights, the momentum swings the Armor of Valor can cause when used at the right time is incredible. Shoes, again, personal preference, whether you prefer the Mage Sandals or the Assassin Shoes. Both are acceptable. Assassin Shoes iframe though really does help you, especially if you run into some of those more nasty pop builds that are just designed to blow you up very, very quickly. Bruisers then, you know, it is just carrion callers wall to wall right now. Understandably, they've also gone up in price if you've noticed that as well. So we'll see what happens when the balance patch drops. Maybe January will bring something new. But just for reference, the carrion callers featured in the Crystal Championship 2 very heavily. There was one team running a pike, the others all ran carrion callers, and even the pike team brought the carrion caller out at some points. You know, there was a lot of pole hammers, stuff like that. So this meta is very representative of the top end right now in GVG. Okay, onto the ranged DPS to finish then, and this really hasn't changed that much. The fire has jumped up a little bit. Great Curse, Heavy Expo and Bow are still the 3 S tier choices. Infernal Staff is only just out of S tier right now, and honestly it would be S tier if it wasn't for these Armor of Valors completely shutting down fire users. Like, you run into that and you just spend half of the fight silenced, and considering it's a defensive plate ability, it does do a lot of damage to you. If you eat like 8-9 ticks from a Valor, it is a big chunk of damage as a Clothy. Again, just below as well, one hand crossbow, Permafrost. Both of those decent, but again, both suffering because of the prevalence of iframes on the Assassin Shoes nowadays. And below them, you know, the Great Fire is another option to go instead of the Infernal, but suffers the same problems. Really, the Trinity choices, Great Curse, Heavy Expo and Bow, are the S tier. Infernal Staff is still very playable, and in fact, it was seen at the top end of the tournament as well, the recent Crystal, but people have just wised up to how good the Valor is at countering the Infernal now. And if you shut down their Druid Robe / Morgana combo, and you're Valoring them every time they try and get a wall down and go defensive, they just don't bring enough to a fight to justify their place. You know, at that point, you're better off with one of the other DPS. It's good to see at least a few different lines in S tier as well. You know, there is 5 playable lines, let's be honest. That's not bad. We're even starting to see DPS Arcane now that we've got this double Magic Shock coming in very, very soon. Will it come into the meta? We'll see next time. The hot picks then for range DPS. Now range DPS are expected to carry a Merc Hood at all times in case you run into these pole hammers. This is a meta switch that's happened simply because of the prevalence of the hammers. You may not always use the Merc Hood, but you're probably going to need one in your bag, whatever your choice is. Scholar's Cowl is a very solid backup choice there. Those are usually the two go-tos. Again, Helm of Valor's kind of dropped off. Used to be used for this sort of AoE purge and cleanse, but it's longer cooldown now. It's a bit clunky. It really just isn't that consistent. Merc Hood, Scholar Cowl are the go-to. Most people default to the Merc Hood and swap to Scholar Cowl if it's safe. At least with the Scholar Cowl, you get a ton of energy management. Again, if you're running the Merc Hood, you'll have to fit your energy management in elsewhere, but most of the weapons will be running energetic as the passive, or perhaps thinking about a Limhurst. For the robes then, Mage Robe, again, the absolute go-to. The Purge is good against things like Soldier Armor, against enemy bows, against enemy Mage Robe, stuff like that. Cleric Robe isn't bad. I honestly think like Cleric Robe's getting better again against a lot of the matchups, but if you get into a trade, Cleric versus Mage, you're going to lose because you're going to get purged and they're going to have their resistances up. So as long as Mage Robes are prevailing, most people are going to have to go Mage Robes to match. Cleric Robe used to do some nice interactions with the old one-hand crossbow. You know, it's good for explosive burst damage, but as a defensive, you just risk, it's so all in with the invulnerability for a few seconds. Like if you get controlled longer than the duration or insta-purged, you're just dead, to be honest. Scholar Robe is only played on Frost. It was potentially played on Fire a while back, but Scholar Robe doesn't really see play because the Pump Fire, if you are playing the Infernal, you're probably playing the Druid Robe on that, which is another reason Fire's not great, is because they have one less defensive. For boots then, Assassin Shoes, Royal Shoes, Blink Sandals, your choice, suit your playstyle, and go with what works best for you. But that's it then. That's the range DPS. That's everything covered. Let me know what you think in the comments. You know, what have you been playing? What are you struggling with in the meta? And of course, what do you think is going to be hot post next balance patch? You know, what would you like to see changed? What do you think needs a buff? Like, I deliberately didn't talk about the Pike in the Bruiser section, because although it's been seen, only 1 or 2 teams are running it. So I didn't feel that it warranted a meta discussion on it, but maybe we'll see it creep up because spears now get a bit more penetration. They've got the new Spirit Hunter ability moved to a W. Maybe we'll see them in the next meta snapshot, but I think it's honestly too high a skill ceiling weapon for the average group. But there you go, the meta snapshot for the month of December. Hope you enjoyed this video, and of course, if you don't mind and you enjoy my content, please do leave a like and subscribe. It massively helps me, massively helps the channel, and hopefully helps more people discover Albion Online too. Thank you guys so much for watching. Have a great day, and I'll see you soon for another video.